A chilling wind swept through Gold Canyon, a valley once bustling with the clang of picks and the roar of dynamite blasts from gold mining. Now, only silence remained, broken by the crumbling ruins of old, dilapidated buildings. Sheriff Davenport, a burly man with a face hardened by sun and wind, was here following the desperate plea of the sole survivor of a mine collapse a week prior. The man raved about shadows hunting him in the darkness and whispers that stole the breath from his comrades. Locals in nearby towns whispered tales of a curse on this mine, claiming a malignant entity resided within. It wasn't a demon, they said, but something awakened by human greed. The whispers and the chilling wind, they warned, were its calling card. Davenport, a man of action and logic, usually dismissed such folklore, but the survivor's terror, raw and undeniable, gave him pause. He found the man, a young prospector named Billy, huddled in a corner of the saloon in Redemption, shivering despite the warmth of the fire. Billy's eyes were wide, vacant, staring at nothing. "It wasn't the rock, Sheriff," Billy rasped, his voice barely audible. "It was the darkness. It breathes. And the whispers, they fill your head, telling you things you can't fight." Billy shuddered, clutching his head. "They took Thomas, then Samuel. Just gone." Davenport tried to get more details, but Billy just repeated, "The shadow, the whispers, they took their breath." Driven by a grim duty, Davenport rode into Gold Canyon alone. The deeper he went, the heavier the silence became, an unnatural stillness that pressed down on him. The air grew colder, even under the midday sun. He dismounted at the entrance to the main mine shaft, a black maw gaping into the earth. The timbers supporting the entrance looked freshly scarred, evidence of the recent collapse. As he ventured inside, his lantern casting flickering shadows, the air grew thick with a fine dark dust that coated everything. It wasn't just ordinary dust. It seemed to shimmer, almost pulse, in the dim light. And then he heard them. Faint, sibilant whispers, dry as ancient bone, seeming to come from the very walls around him. They were too numerous, too pervasive to be simple echoes. They coiled around his mind, a dry, insidious chorus that spoke of desperation and lingering fear. Suddenly, a cold, unseen gust of wind swept through the tunnel, extinguishing his lantern with a soft whoosh. Davenport was plunged into absolute darkness. The only sound the escalating whispers that now filled his head, speaking in a chorus of fragmented, tormented voices. He felt a chilling presence, something vast and ancient, stirring in the depths of the mine. This was no ordinary mine collapse. This was something far more insidious, something that breathed and whispered in the dark, and it had just claimed his light. Plunged into absolute darkness, Sheriff Davenport felt the true terror of Gold Canyon. The whispers escalated, surrounding him, pressing into his mind, forming a suffocating chorus of desperate, fragmented thoughts. "Cold, empty, join us." The air grew impossibly frigid, a chilling dampness that seeped into his bones, far colder than any mountain cave. He fumbled desperately for his matches, his fingers clumsy with cold and fear. He could hear the faint, dry scraping sounds moving through the darkness around him, as if something unseen was slithering or dragging itself along the tunnel walls. The whispers seemed to respond to these sounds, growing more agitated, more demanding. Finally, with a trembling hand, he struck a match. The tiny flame sputtered, then caught, casting a dancing, meager light that barely pushed back the overwhelming darkness. And then he saw it. It wasn't a creature of flesh and blood, or even solid form. It was a swirling, amorphous cloud of inky blackness, thicker than shadows, deeper than night. It pulsed faintly, absorbing the meager light from his match, making the darkness around it seem even more profound. It had no discernible features, no eyes or limbs, yet its presence was undeniably vast and ancient. It breathed the darkness. As the match flickered, The dark cloud seemed to constrict, flowing towards him with an unnerving, silent speed. The whispers intensified, now seeming to emanate directly from its swirling form, taking on a desperate, pleading quality. "Breath! Give us breath!" Davenport remembered Billy's terrified words. They took their breath. This was the breath stealer, the entity that haunted the mine, consuming the very essence of life, leaving behind desiccated husks. He felt a suffocating pressure in his chest, as if the air was being slowly drawn from his lungs. The whispers in his head became louder, more demanding, tempting him to simply give in, to simply breathe out and let it take him. He fired his Colt. The shot roared in the confined space, but the bullet simply passed through the swirling darkness, leaving no impact, no disturbance. The cloud absorbed the sound, the light, the very force of the projectile, then flowed closer, its cold, consuming essence reaching out. Davenport dropped the useless gun and scrambled backwards, desperately trying to put distance between himself and the terrifying entity. He remembered the reports of missing miners, their bodies never found, or found as mummified husks. This was why. The shadow consumed everything, leaving no trace. He ran deeper into the mine, hoping to find another exit, another way out of the suffocating darkness. The air grew even colder, thinner, harder to breathe. He could feel the pervasive pressure of the breath stealer, its tendrils of darkness reaching for him, trying to drain the life from his very core. The whispers, now a frantic cacophony, filled his mind, urging him to surrender, to become one with the all-consuming void. Davenport stumbled deeper into the labyrinthine mine, each breath a painful struggle against the suffocating presence of the breath stealer. The whispers were a constant, tormenting chorus in his mind, echoing the panicked thoughts of countless consumed souls. Lost, trapped, empty. The oppressive cold of the entity seemed to crystallize the very air, making every inhale feel like breathing ice. He found himself in a large, central cavern, its ceiling lost in the gloom. The flickering light from his lantern, now his only source of illumination, revealed dozens of abandoned mining tools, rusted pickaxes, discarded lanterns, and even skeletal remains of unlucky prospectors, their bones bleached white and unnaturally dry. In the center of the cavern, a massive, unworked vein of black quartz snaked its way through the rock, pulsing faintly with an internal, dark luminescence. It was unervingly beautiful, yet it radiated an ancient, malevolent energy that made the hairs on Davenport's arms stand on end. He realized this quartz wasn't just a mineral. It was the heart of the darkness, the anchor for the breath stealer. The swirling black cloud of the breath stealer poured into the cavern behind him, its amorphous form filling the entrance, blocking any escape. Its tendrils stretched out, testing the air, its omnipresent hunger palpable. The whispers intensified, now carrying distinct, chilling voices of terror and despair from the consumed. Davenport raised his pickaxe, a desperate weapon against the unseen. He lunged at the black quartz vein, bringing the pickaxe down with all his might. The metal rang against the crystalline rock with a harsh, grating usage, sending sparks flying. The reaction was immediate and violent. The breath stealer shrieked, a dry, tearing sound that seemed to shred the very air. The immense black cloud convulsed, its amorphous form flailing wildly. The whispers turned into a chaotic, tormented wail, as if countless souls within it were crying out in agony. The black quartz vein itself pulsed erratically, its dark luminescence flaring and dimming, as if in pain. Davenport realized the connection. The quartz wasn't just an anchor. It was a prison, or perhaps a conduit. The breath stealer was tethered to it, drawing power from it, but also vulnerable through it. Each strike against the quartz caused the entity immense pain. He brought the pickaxe down again and again, aiming for the heart of the vein. Each blow sent agonizing ripples through the breath stealer's form, causing it to shriek and writhe. It tried to lash out, its tendrils of darkness whipping through the air, but the pain from the quartz seemed to disrupt its focus, preventing it from fully manifesting its draining touch. The cavern began to shake from the repeated impacts and the entity's thrashing. Dust rained down, and cracks appeared in the ceiling. Davenport knew he was running out of time. He had to destroy the quartz, or risk the entire mine collapsing on him, whether by the entity's power or his own frantic efforts. He gripped the pickaxe, his breath ragged, and swung again, aiming for a deep fault line in the pulsing black rock. Davenport's pickaxe struck the pulsating black quartz vein with a resounding crack, deeper than before, aiming for the heart of its dark luminescence. The cavern groaned, and the black quartz shrieked, a raw, crystalline sound of pure agony. The Breath Stealer's reaction was immediate and catastrophic. Its immense, swirling form convulsed violently, no longer just flailing, but tearing at itself. The dark cloud began to fracture, splitting into dozens of smaller, chaotic vortices that swirled erratically through the cavern. The whispers escalated into a deafening, tormented chorus of screams, 1,000 desperate voices trapped within the dissolving darkness, crying out in unison as their eternal prison was shattered. The black quartz vein itself exploded with a blinding flash of dark light, sending razor-sharp shards of obsidian-like rock flying in every direction. Davenport threw himself to the ground, shielding his head, as the very heart of the mine's malevolence disintegrated. When the blinding flash subsided, and the ringing in his ears began to fade, Davenport slowly raised his head. The cavern was silent. The oppressive cold had vanished, replaced by the natural, cool dampness of the mine. The horrifying whispers were gone, leaving behind only the echoing sound of dust settling. The Breath Stealer, the amorphous cloud of darkness, was nowhere to be seen. Where it had been, only a faint, lingering mist hung in the air, quickly dissipating. It didn't just break apart, it was utterly annihilated, its essence dispersed, its power broken. The black quartz, its source and prison, lay shattered into countless inert fragments. Davenport pushed himself up, his body aching, covered in dust and small cuts from the flying debris. He felt an immense sense of relief, a weight lifted from his very soul. The suffocating pressure in his chest was gone. He could breathe freely again, the air clean and cold. But the victory was short-lived. The destruction of the black quartz vein, the very core of the mountain's stability, had destabilized the entire mine. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble violently, and a deep, guttural groan echoed from the depths of the earth. Dust and rocks rained down more heavily, and the ancient timbers supporting the cavern's ceiling began to creak and splinter ominously. He had defeated the entity, but now the mountain itself was collapsing around him. He had to get out, and fast. He looked towards the mine entrance, a faint glimmer of daylight in the distance, a beacon of hope. He grabbed a sturdy, discarded pickaxe for support and began to run, scrambling over the shifting rubble, the roar of the collapsing mine chasing him, echoing the last dying screams of the whispers that had once tormented him. Davenport ran, fueled by pure adrenaline, the roar of the collapsing mine thundering in his ears. The cavern, once a dark prison, was now a death trap, its ceiling groaning and splintering, its walls shedding rock and debris. He scrambled over fallen timbers and loose boulders, his lungs burning from the effort and the dust-choked air. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and crushed rock. The oppressive cold of the Breath Stealer was gone, replaced by a suffocating heat rising from the deep, churning bowels of the collapsing mine. He could feel the very mountain shuddering, as if protesting its own destruction. He reached a narrow, twisting tunnel, its wooden supports groaning under immense pressure. He could hear the crunch of timbers giving way behind him, followed by the deafening thump of massive rock falls. He pushed harder, ignoring the sharp pains in his side and the scrapes on his arms from the jagged rock. Just as he thought he was nearing the exit, a section of the tunnel ahead collapsed with a deafening roar, blocking his path with a massive pile of rubble. Davenport skidded to a halt, cursing under his breath. He was trapped, deeper inside the collapsing mountain. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but his years on the frontier had forged him into a man who did not easily surrender. He scanned the collapsed section, looking for any weakness, any crack, any hope. He spotted a faint gap where two massive boulders had fallen, leaving a tight, almost impossibly narrow opening. It was barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. He dropped his pickaxe, knowing it would only hinder him. He took a deep breath, sucking in the dust-filled air, and began to squeeze himself through the narrow gap. It was a tight fit, the rough rock scraping against his clothes and skin, pressing against his chest. He pushed, grunted, and strained, inching his way forward through the suffocating darkness. Behind him, the mine continued its terrifying collapse. He heard a final deafening crash that shook the very ground he was crawling on, signaling that the cavern he had just left had likely fully caved in. He was running on borrowed time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he pushed his way through the last tight spot and tumbled out onto the dusty ground. He was outside, gasping for breath, staring up at the clear, star-filled night sky. He was alive. He looked back at the mine entrance. It was no longer a gaping maw, but a solid wall of freshly fallen rock, sealed forever. Gold Canyon's dark secret was buried deep within its heart, locked away by the very mountain it had once tormented. Davenport lay there for a long moment, simply breathing, feeling the cool desert air on his face. The whispers were gone. The cold was gone. The dark shadow of Gold Canyon had been banished, sealed beneath a mountain of rock. He was exhausted, battered, but alive. He knew he had to leave this place, but not before ensuring its dreadful secret remained buried. Sheriff Davenport stumbled away from the now sealed mine entrance, leaving Gold Canyon's dark secret buried deep within the earth. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying only the familiar scent of creosote and dust. The oppressive silence that had once hung over the canyon was gone, replaced by the natural sounds of the desert night. The distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of a desert mouse, the soft whisper of the wind through the sagebrush. He walked until dawn, his body aching, his mind reeling from the horrors he had witnessed. He made his way back to Redemption, the nearby town, where he simply reported that the mine had collapsed and the survivor, Billy, had been lost in the initial cave-in, an easier truth to swallow than the terrifying reality of the breath stealer. He kept the true nature of Gold Canyon's curse to himself, a grim secret he would carry for the rest of his days. The news of the mine's permanent collapse spread, putting an end to any future prospecting ventures in Gold Canyon. The valley became a place avoided, its reputation for bad luck growing, but its true, malevolent force remained unknown to all but Davenport. Davenport continued his life as a sheriff, but he was changed. He was quieter, his eyes holding a deeper understanding of the unseen forces that could exist in the world. He was still a man of logic and action, but now he sometimes saw the shadows differently, heard the wind with a new awareness. He knew that the vast empty spaces of the West held more than just outlaws and gold. They held ancient, inexplicable horrors. He never returned to Gold Canyon. But sometimes, when a dust storm raged across the plains, or when a particularly cold gust of wind swept through the night, he would feel a faint chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He would remember the suffocating darkness, the fragmented whispers, and the all-consuming hunger of the breath stealer. He would remember the shattered black quartz and the roar of a collapsing mountain. Gold Canyon remained a silent, desolate place, its dark history sealed away. The whispers that had stolen breath were silenced, the shadows that had hunted in the deep were banished. And Sheriff Davenport, the man who had faced the true evil of the mine, carried the burden of that knowledge, forever a guardian of the vast, silent, and still terrifying western frontier.